Tax season is officially upon us, and especially if you've never done taxes as an Uber driver or as a Lyft driver, you're going to be very shocked because if you've typically done like a W-2 or you've worked for somebody else, your taxes are usually pretty simple. However, when it comes to being an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, or a rideshare driver in general, you're an independent contractor, typically, depending on what state you're in, and therefore your taxes are gonna be a lot more complicated. So in this video, I'm gonna give you 5 pieces of tax advice when it comes to driving for Lyft and driving for Uber. Now, one thing I wanna stress before I even go into this video is that I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. Everybody's situation is different, and I just want to say that right in the beginning of this video, which leads me to tip number 1, hire a tax accountant. Now, like I said, everybody's situation is very different. If let's say you drive for Lyft and Uber full time, you're typically going to have a lot of write-offs and a lot of itemized deductions. However, if let's say you do a typical 9-to-5 job and you drive for Lyft and Uber just on the weekends, well, your taxes are going to be a lot different. So that's why I always suggest hire a tax accountant. This is huge because even for me as a former accountant, I still hire a tax accountant. I want to hire somebody that lives, eats, and breathes taxes because the tax code is always changing, and there's somebody who can see the entire big picture of all my finances, all my income, and all my write-offs and determine the best way to move forward. Number 2, miles over gas. Now, typically, you can write off your miles or your gas, but not both. And a lot of Lyft and Uber drivers think, okay, I kind of know a little bit about taxes. I'm gonna keep track of my gas receipts so I can write off my gas on my tax returns. However, you can write off way more money regarding the miles that you drove for a Lyft and Uber. Now, I want to say that typically that is the case. However, maybe there is some rare case where you actually can write off more from your gas. But being honest, typically it's from your miles. So do not sleep on your miles. Make sure you keep track of them. I know Lyft and Uber has gotten better about kind of keeping track of your miles, and now you can even go in your account and see exactly how many miles you drove. But there's a bunch of other apps, like Mile IQ, for example, is a great app that you can basically track what miles are more personal, so you going to your friend's house, and what miles relate to Lyft and Uber. Number 3, track everything. This is huge because now that you're a Lyft and Uber driver, you're gonna have, like I said, write-offs and itemized deductions. So keeping track of things like gas and miles, because you never know which one's gonna be higher. Like I said earlier though, typically miles. Keeping track of the maintenance on your car, like if you have to change your tires, oil changes, any maintenance that you need. In addition, let's say you buy stuff specifically for Lyft and Uber. Like let's say you buy, I don't know, napkins. I've done a bunch of pro tips about different things you should have in your car. I've linked this below to 120 Uber and Lyft pro tips to make more money and get higher ratings. And in those videos, I talk about buying things like napkins for your car, having Febreze, maybe even having like a tip jar in kind of the center console. All of those things you can typically write off because they're related to the ordinary and necessary part of being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. But remember, this is something that your tax accountant will 100% be able to figure out. Remember though, you are way better off keeping track of everything and your tax accountant comes to you and says, hey, you know what? Sorry, these couple items you can't write off, than not keeping track of anything and not being able to write off all that money on your taxes. Number 4, having a special credit card. Now, this is something that every entrepreneur and every business owner has to do. They typically have 2 credit cards. One is for personal purchases. So let's say if you're going out with friends, you're getting drinks, stuff that's related to your personal life. The second credit card they have is for all the business expenses. That way, when you sit down with your tax accountant, you can say, hey, see all these statements on my credit card? All these statements specifically relate to my business. Same thing with you being a Lyft and Uber driver. Especially if you're driving full time, getting a credit card just related to Lyft and Uber is a great pro tip. Now, one thing I do have to stress, if you're not good with money, if you're one of those people that sees, let's say a $2,000 credit limit and you instantly go and blow it, don't get a credit card. I definitely have to stress that point. However, if you're used to having a credit card, honestly, get a second one, and a big pro tip on top of that is get a gas card. Yes, even though typically you will write off miles over gas, you can still get points and get rewards and get, some discounts on buying gas, which you have to do anyway. So if I were you, if let's say you're like, look, I can get a second credit card, it works for me. Maybe look into a gas card, again, especially if you're driving full time, you can get discounts on gas, and that way you say, okay, any single time I'm buying something for Lyft and Uber, whether it's maintenance on my car, whether it's an item for me driving, whatever it is, as long as it relates to Lyft and Uber, you put it on that credit card. And last, but definitely not least, number 5 is do not use any tax software. I'm talking about TurboTax. I mean, there's a bunch of them. I'll just pick TurboTax as an example, and here's why. Like I said earlier in this video, if let's say you have like a typical 9-to-5 job, that's very different. You're probably gonna be on a W-2, and TurboTax is gonna make it a lot easier because with tax software, it's very simple. Your taxes are gonna be very, very easy. However, when it comes to being a rideshare driver, being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, like you've seen in the video, there's a lot of kind of gray areas depending on the write-offs that you're doing, depending on how many miles you drive versus gas. There's so many little things you have to kind of keep in mind. And again, especially if let's say you drive for Lyft and Uber and you have, let's say, a 9-to-5 job, there's a lot of things you'd have to think about when it comes to doing your taxes in terms of those two income streams. That's why I suggest bring this point home. Always hire a tax accountant. Do not use tax software because an actual tax accountant can sit down and be like, all right, you can do these write-offs, you can't do these ones. You can actually get more money written off because of this, and this. You can write off these miles more than gas, etc., etc. Do not use tax software. Always hire a tax accountant.